RoH Part 4, Scene 1, mid-3010, 5.5 years later, the Aram Agency Tower Building. All parents share genetic traits with their offspring. Trian smiled down at the young boy sitting in her lap and tapped the glass cage in front of them. 2 six-legged lizards scurried over their rocks and onto a tiny pool of water. But the third, the smallest, came right up to the glass behind her finger and stared at them with wide yellow slit eyes. Look at this green horntail. He has red bands on his body and a red dot on his forehead. The other 2 are his parents. You can see that one parent has the red bands, the other the dot, but neither parent has both. Through a process called meiosis, the genetic traits of the parents get mixed together to form new genetic profile of traits that the offspring inherits. So this lizard is a mix of traits of both his parents. Large silver-grey eyes stared up at her, and she sensed that young Wolf Malar understood what she was saying, even though he was only 9 years old. So, he frowned, I should share traits with my parents? She nodded. Yes, little ghost, that is correct. What kind of traits? We don't have spots or bands. Or tails, laughed Trian, as she gave the boy a wink. Well, traits can be anything. Hair colour, eye colour, the tone of your skin, birthmarks, shape of your face, your hands, even aspects of your personality, such as how you deal with stress, your emotional stability, and any tendencies towards developing certain diseases and disorders. And of course, our side genes. He nodded. Yes, and time side genes can skip generations because they are triple recessive and can be locked, which is why neither of my parents are time side like me, correct? Exactly, she said quietly. Come, let's learn about the difference between mitosis and meiosis. I have a video on the computer. Okay. He shuffled off her lap and she got to her feet. His little hand snaked into hers and she suppressed a shot of sadness. Wolf was so very much like his real father had once been, calm on the outside but a wash of emotions underneath. They crossed the room, past stark metal lab benches and mazes of glass apparatus, to the other side where her computer sat on its broad wooden desk. The computer was very new, considered the best you could buy. But the softened thing was too smart for its own good, and she'd spent nearly a month turning off all of the helpful programs so she could actually use it. Sitting down in her chair, she placed her hand on the desk pad. Her identity was digitally confirmed, and the computer unlocked itself. She flicked her fingers over the desk pad and loaded up the virtual keyboard on its smooth plastic surface. She input the relevant commands to bring up her genetics teaching module for her second senior class, and loaded the meiosis-mitosis video sequence. The boy's oval face was calm and attentive, but she sensed an underlying concentration in him, which meant he had a question and was thinking over how best to word it. She waited patiently as she pretended there were other things to check before playing the video sequence. He was not a boy to be rushed, or he would shut down and never ask his question. But being as smart as he was, as smart as both of his real parents, he needed someone to answer his questions, or he would never reach his intellectual potential. Trian, he said in a very small voice, if I'm made up only of parts of my mother and father, how come I'm so different to them? Well, she said, lifting him up onto her lap, you are different because you are you. It's like those connecting construction blocks you play with sometimes. There are a finite amount of blocks, but you can make many different things with them. You are made up of blocks from your parents, but from those blocks, you are made into something different to them. She wrapped her arms around his skinny frame and hugged him tightly. Now, do you want to learn about meiosis and mitosis, or would you like to go back to class? No, he laughed. Class is boring. He rumpled his light brown hair with one hand. Okay then, sit quiet and listen. Scene 2. Wolf's mother, Della, had pitch black hair, which was as straight as an arrow and cut squarely around her oval face. Her dark brown eyes sparkled with her smile, and her small, delicate fingers tickled his brother Mana in the ribs. His father, Canaan, picked up his son Mana by the ankles. Canaan's curly dark hair bounced around his face as he lifted the boy clean off the cream carpet of their sitting room. Wolf's brother, Mana, looked like them. He had his mother's face and eyes, and his father's hair and hands. Mana was growing into a strong, broad-shouldered boy, just like his father. Wolf was fair-haired, not quite blonde, not quite brown. He had grey eyes that were nearly silver. His hands were long-fingered with a square palm, and he was strong but not broad, with fairly long limbs. He wasn't like them at all. For 2 days, Wolf had watched his family, and he couldn't find even one thing that he physically had in common with Mana and his parents. Wolf had lived with the Mala family his whole life, but based on Treant's lesson on meiosis, he could not be their real son. Della saw him standing quietly in the doorway, and she smiled. "Come and join us, Wolf." The young boy shook his head and stepped out of view. The question burned in the back of his mind, and it wouldn't go away. He absolutely had to know the answer. His mother was a gentle soul, most of the time, and he knew that he couldn't ask her this question without upsetting her. There was only one person he could safely ask without a negative reaction. Scene break. Treant sat typing up a report on her computer. An hour ago, she had sent all of her lab assistants and students away, so she could actually get some work done. But the room was cold, and the only light was a small yellow halo around her computer from the desk lamp. She brushed at her forehead and sighed. 2 more reports, and she would break for lunch. Little feet skittered on the floor behind her, and she turned in her chair. Wolf had a face so much like his mother's, oval and gentle, her silver eyes, her easy-to-smile lips. But his body was so much like his father had been at his age. Not tall, but lean and strong, with Dobed's sandy brown hair as well. She grinned at the boy. "Hello, little ghost. How are you today?" "Who are my real parents?" The question burst out of him, and she sensed it had been burning in the back of his brain for some time. She laughed. "Straight to the point today, aren't we?" She pulled her chair out from the desk. "What makes you think your parents aren't your real parents?" The boy climbed adeptly onto her lap. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders as he leaned back against her, and she kissed his hair. "You told me that children inherit traits from both parents. I don't have anything in common with mother and father. There are no shared traits. Therefore, they're not my real parents. So who are my biological parents?" Treant brushed affectionately at the boy's light hair with one hand. She let this question sit in the air as she thought about how best to answer it without getting herself into trouble. "Well, even if that were true, why would it matter who your genetic parents are? Don't you like living with Della? Is she mean to you?" He laughed. "No, she's fine. Mana is mean, but I'm told that's normal for brothers." "Then what does it matter?" "I'm not like them." His voice was quiet, and she sensed a pang of loneliness. "I have to pretend to be like them, or I get into trouble. If they are not my parents, maybe I could find my real ones, and then I wouldn't have to pretend anymore." In her shock at his innocent honesty, Treant failed to suppress her very deep sadness for his situation. The boy, being a rather sensitive empath, turned around in her lap and looked up at her with those huge silver eyes of his. "What's wrong? Did I say something bad?" A tear dropped down one of her cheeks, and she gave him a sad smile. "I understand how you feel, Wolf. I don't really fit in either, but I want you to listen in carefully." This was their code word for the boy to listen to her thoughts, and not her words, to circumvent any bugs or spies that might be in her lab room. As she verbally said what she was supposed to say, telling the boy that of course Della was her mother, and not to ask such silly questions again, Trianarino dropped her artificial mental shield to admit him. His telepathic touch was very gentle, and she barely sensed the pressure in her mind. Being only an empath, she couldn't hear his thoughts, so making it an imperfect form of communication, but it was sufficient for her to tell him things that she couldn't verbally. "Little ghost, you know if I lie to you it's for a reason?" She asked a verbal yes-no question so he could answer. He nodded. "Geran would kill me if he knew I told you this." So, whatever you do with this information, please be very careful. She saw the fear rise up in his eyes, and she knew he would do all that was needed to keep her safe. The names of your real parents are Sarah and Dobed Ainan. Your mother was killed while she was still pregnant, and we barely managed to save you. Your father was told that you died. No one but me and your grandfather knows who your real parents are, not even Della. Now, if you wish to approach your father, be careful. He was like you before your mother died, but since then he's changed for the worse. He may not welcome you if you go to him, and if he finds out I told you, he may try to kill me. She'd finished her verbal correction and gently pushed against the boy's mental touch, so he knew it was time to leave. He withdrew, and she lifted her shielding again. Do you understand? Her tone was still correcting, but he knew that it was part of the pretend game they needed to play to keep up appearances, even in the empty lab. He mimicked a very chastised expression and lowered his head. Yes, ma'am. Good. She lifted him off her lap. Now, I need to continue with my work. How about you go up to the library and work on that assignment I sent yesterday? I'll come upstairs and take you for lunch when I'm done here. Scene 3. 2 days later. Wolf had gotten clearance for the day's reconnaissance mission and left the tower at 8 in the morning. He fully intended to do the said recon before he went looking for his father, but found himself standing in front of the cathedral an hour after leaving base. The cathedral loomed over him. Lines of black stone cut the edges of the building into towering angular sections. Broad tiered steps led up to a pair of ancient wooden doors. Ignoring the sense of being utterly swallowed by the great building, Wolf made his way up the stairs and stepped inside. The sense of being eaten intensified as he stared up at the mouth-like vaulted ceiling. He swallowed down his fear and forced his eyes to look down again. All of this extra unused space was disorienting. He made his way across to the far side of the room, around long pews and the figures of robed adults, to a door on the opposite corner. Through the door was a small square parlour that led out to 2 different hallways, one to his right and one straight ahead. He'd memorised the cathedral floor plan and knew generally where he was supposed to go, but he still paused to think. Rechecking his memory, he stepped forward into the central office area of the cathedral. The hallway beyond was framed at regular intervals by high stone support columns that curved inwards and met in the middle of the ceiling like the pointed end of a teardrop. To either side of him were huge wooden doors with black iron trappings, each leading to the offices of working priests, priestesses, and kita. Ahead, the hall turned right in a U-shape and around the corner. After the bend, he knew there was one door on the left, and the next was his real father's office. Pausing at his door, Wolf consciously slowed his anxious breathing. He'd made it, and there was no point in being nervous now. The little boy took a breath and knocked on the wood. He heard a dim voice from inside. Come. Leaning up, he turned the brass handle and pushed. The room beyond was large and mostly empty. A tall bookcase stood against the stone wall to his right, and there was a big old wooden desk in the centre, with a man sitting at it, writing with pen and paper. He turned to look at Wolf with a kindly smile. Aren't you a bit young to be walking around the monastery, little one? The man had sandy brown hair like his, not quite brown, but not quite blonde. Wolf looked at the hand that rested on the side of the desk. He had a square palm, with long, strong fingers. They also had the same shaped hands. The man's eyes were very bright blue like Jaran's, his face much squarer than Wolf's. There was enough similarity in his features for Wolf to see himself in him. The boy carefully turned around and closed the door. He approached the desk, thinking deeply about what he wanted to say. My name is Wolf Malar. As the words left his lips, the threads of time pulsed and quivered around them like water when it's disturbed. He blinked in surprise. He didn't know the right words, but he knew that whatever that ripple was, he was meant to be there, and that it was a pivotal moment in time. He swallowed. This only made it more important for him to speak. Focusing on his words and not the flowing, bouncing ripples in time and space around him, he continued. I am an A1 undergraduate. and I know you're an A0 operative. He pulled out his underage agent ID and placed it on the desk in front of him. Your married name is Ainan, born Dobard Cody. The man didn't confirm or deny, he just calmly listened. Nearly 10 years ago, your wife Sarah Ainan was murdered, and you were told that her unborn baby died as well. Wolf sensed the slightest flare of sadness, and the man swallowed. They lied to you about the baby. He did survive. I survived. His father's mouth opened slightly, and Wolf sensed a flare of absolute surprise. His calm face broke into a grin, and tears rose up in his eyes. His voice was unsteady. You have her eyes. Wolf turned his head on the side. I do? What was she like? His father turned his chair completely around to face Wolf and leaned over to rest his hands on his knees. Wolf sensed an awkward uncertainty in his father. Well, she was happy and laughed often. She loved you from the very moment we found out she was pregnant. She would have loved you fiercely had she lived. Wolf smiled at the thought of being loved even before he was born. Tell me about you, Dad. He straightened in his chair. Well, what do you want to know? Everything. His father laughed. Where do I start? I have no idea. Hey, do you want to go for a walk down to the city park? We could spend the day and get to know each other. For the first time in many months, Wolf smiled genuinely. I haven't been to this city park before, but I'm on a recon mission today. I need some things for my report at the end of the day, or I'll get into trouble with my supervisor. I'm not even supposed to be here. I'm sure I can help you with that. I know the city pretty well. Do you have a favourite food, Wolf? I don't know. Isn't all food the same? His father chuckled. Let's go to the park first, and you can tell me about the things you're interested in. As his father got to his feet and approached, Wolf looked sideways up at him with a frown on his face. Are you like a ghost? People get upset with me because they don't notice me. Even Trian has nicknamed me Little Ghost. In fact, I am a bit like a ghost. People don't notice me unless I want them to. They call me the Enigma because of that very same quality. His father's eyes sparkled. It's fun, though, sometimes, isn't it? Wolf laughed as they walked out of the office. Yes, I like to sneak up on Trian Rina, but she's tricky and I don't always succeed. Do you see Trian often? Yes, she's the only one who answers my questions, so I see her almost every day. Wolf paused, unsure if he should continue. They stepped out of the hallways and into the vaulted sanctuary. He forced his mind to focus on what he should tell his father, and not the sensation of being swallowed by some great beast made of grey stone. Wolf sensed in his father and in the ripples of time which they made together that it was safe to tell him anything, but perhaps it was better if he was overly careful as well. Wolf gently reached for his father's mind and switched to speaking without words. Trian told me that you're my father. He swallowed. I don't want her to get into trouble because of me. They walked out into the cobbled cathedral square, and as they approached the road, his father carefully lifted him up into his arms. I promise I won't tell anyone that Trian helped you, and I'll do what I can to help her. His father's mental voice was a crisp, cool blue. It was very calm and vibrated with an underlying black static pulse. Wolf frowned. Do you know time too, Dad? I can feel your static, but your file says that your time side genes are inert. His father gave him a mischievous half smile. Don't tell anyone, son, but my genes are no longer inert. I won't tell, especially not Jaran. That is very wise, son. Your grandfather might kill me if he knew. Wolf grinned wryly. Sharan doesn't see any real truth, only what he wants to see, and that's creating his own end. Hawk will kill him one day soon, and you and I will be free. I've seen him die in my dreams. There was a sense of tension in his father's mental voice. Do you see who Hawk is in your dreams? He shook his head. No, Dad, I only see a wooden hawk mask holding fire. But I know Hawk will free us all eventually. I just have to wait long enough. They crossed a busy street, and he saw a line of green ahead of them. It was a large block of lush green field edged on one side by a line of gnarled trees. Wolf stared at the expanse of grass and had the ridiculous urge to run across it as fast as he possibly could, just for the joy of it. Do you tell anyone of these dreams? Can they get inside your head and see them? Wolf smiled. His dad was asking if other people knew he wasn't loyal to the agency. No, Dad, it's safe. I'm a 6'5" telepath. They can't get in. Wolf sensed surprise in his father. But you've let me in. I'm only a 3. That's because I can trust you, Dad. I can show you everything of who I am and what I've seen because you're... He struggled to find the right words. You're like me. I'm like you. We're the same in the most important way possible. And what way is that? I don't know the proper words, but we fit, we match. In the place where time exists, absolutely. Our threads run along each other. Our futures and our pasts are linked. Our threads run along the same path and make the same ripples in the world. Wolf sensed understanding. His father smiled sideways at him. I believe the term is that we echo each other, son. His father gently lifted him down from his arms onto the grass he'd seen before. Blue eyes looked down at him. What if I told you that I know who Hawk is? Do you think it would be safe for me to tell you? Wolf frowned and closed his eyes for a moment. He projected his mind through time to see the effects of his knowing or not knowing on the future. Static tingled over his face and flowed lazily down his spine. He saw that there were no disasters caused directly by his knowing who Hawk was. In fact, there seemed to be a more positive thread along that path. I see no negative effects in the future with me knowing, so it's probably safe, Dad. I certainly won't tell. His father paused for a moment, and then his mental voice was very gentle. I am Hawk.